No, not yet. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome onto the stage here at the French Institute here at the Ciné Lumière, the director Mike Figgis. Lovely to see you. Mike, be careful.
Be careful.
That is the mic. 2 mics, the price of 1.
Thanks.
There you go. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Jason Solomon. It's a pleasure to see you. Thank you so much for having us back here at Ciné Lumière, and thank you so much to the Academy for this, the next in their series of The Craft of Film. Real pleasure to have you with us tonight, Mike. And thank you so much for this 90s classic,
Thank you.
Internal Affairs, one of my favourite films of the 90s, so I was thrilled to be asked to talk to you about it. I'm wondering when you see it back, because you've just sat there watching it, and saw yourself as an art, well, you're an art critic in there, an art dealer?
Gallery owner.
A gallery owner, yeah, there you are. Fantastic performance. I wonder if you see it back and all you can see are the cuts that you made, the days on set, they come back to you working with those actors. Does it all come flooding back? And do you think, God, that was good?
Yeah, it's a very strange experience because I haven't seen it projected, as I said, probably since it came out. And then I've seen bits of it on video for various reasons. I've never seen it all the way through. I'm much more familiar with the music, with the soundtrack, funnily enough, you know.
Because you play on that as
I play on that, yeah. So it turns up on my iTunes a lot and things like that. It's very good it's good driving music. But yeah, it's so strange watching it. Some scenes I'd completely forgotten that were in the film. Blown away by John Alonzo's handheld cinematography, rock steady, I mean, on a big screen. I persuaded him, basically. He hadn't handheld for a long time. So John Alonzo, who shot Chinatown and many other great movies, liked to play golf, basically. He liked to get home soon, you know, so he didn't want to do endless takes. Very simple lighting. And I knew he was a short, strong man, and I knew I'd heard that he was a great handheld operator, and so I persuaded him to pick up the camera. Normally he used Purnell, his operator, to do most of the shots, but I really got him to operate again.
And you wanted to go handheld because?
Just, it felt right, you know. It felt like it gave a kind of immediacy to the movement, and it meant that the camera was in there rather than that, you know, the classic thing of being on a support system. Having operated myself a lot since then, I'm blown away by how steady his handheld stuff is. I mean, it really looks like Steadicam a lot of the time, and we never once used a Steadicam.
And it's all on film, obviously.
On film, which is also a joy. Wow, you know.
And that really, I mean, to me, that really is, and I see so many now, and that try and look like film, but they can't quite get that.
The interesting
texture.
thing is, it's out of focus compared to 4K, 5K, 8K, whatever the K of de jour is. When you see stuff now, it is so clinically in focus, and actually, it's in focus, technically speaking, but compared to high-end digital, it's really soft, which I like. You know, skin tones look much more beautiful. You just go with it, and it gives a kind of impressionism. At the time, of course, as far as we were all concerned, it was clinically razor sharp, you know, because that's what our standard was.
I wonder if you watch it now as I do, and you then sort of file it as a 90s classic, for example, and obviously it reminds you of 90s LA shooting there. Does it remind you of the sort of moral tenor of the times? Has it got something to say about the 90s itself as a decade? Or, I mean, because it takes place on the sort of cusp, doesn't it? It's the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, and it has it's like, he calls him a yuppie at one place, which is a sort of a late 80s phenomenon. But it's about property and corruption and greed and betrayal. I know those are things that we take for granted now, of course, in 2019.
And your problem is? Some of the language, obviously, given the kind of gender politics of all kinds of politics now, it's like, wow, it's a little bit raw, and it's very violent, the film. I have to say, in sort of in defense, I'm not defending it really, the original script was probably 2 or 3 times more violent. The body count was incredible, and at one point I had a very stormy meeting with Henry Bean, a brilliant writer, and said, Henry, I think we've got to kill less people. I mean, can we just be a little bit more frugal with the deaths? And he was very angry about it, and resisted. But I did get the body count way, way down from the original. And also, in the original script, it was much more violent in terms of its graphic description. There was one shot which said he called to see teeth exploding out of a head that had been shot, and I went, I really don't think we should do the exploding teeth. So we kind of made a pact and we got to this level. But looking at it now, I see it's very violent and very violent towards women. Although realistic, I believe, I would say.
Realistic for the time and realistic for
realistic
those
for any
characters.
time. Violence towards women is a fact. And so, but there was a kind of unrestrained quality to the drama in that respect, which I don't think you'd get now.
Well, I think it was termed a noir. I think we would still say it has noir. There's a lot of shadows and shadow play in it. Was there a particular period of film that you were trying to move on for and trying to echo in some way as well? As you said, with the violence against women, there's a sort of white heat element to it, or a double indemnity. Were those classic noirs?
I think more like the Altman's Long Goodbye. There's, I think that made a huge impression on me when I saw it way before, obviously, I made the film. And probably Point Blank, those kind of.
So both colour noirs.
Yeah, not so much the black and white stuff. And, this was my first American film, but I was heavily in a Jean-Luc Godard, follower. And as the kind of, I think I was brought a kind of naivety to the way I made the film, as in I wasn't really aware really about filmmaking so much. It just, number one, it was a good script. It was Henry Bean is a really terrific writer, very unusual, talented man. I've recently reconnected with him, and you cannot kind of under or overestimate the value of a good script to start off with. A lot of times you are compensating and trying to patch things as you go along. This was not the case with this.
It was a script that you could read and see where it was going, and
it was great. And also there was room to improvise within that too. Yeah.
Was it a script that was much in demand in Hollywood? I mean, you'd made Stormy Monday here in the UK, and off you go to Hollywood for your first film, like John Borman. Actually, Point Blank was his first American film as well. So you get this script. How did it come to you? Did Figgis, the new boy in town? Weren't huge directors after this? Was it a hot property script?
No, I was actually offered another script first called The Hotspot, which Dennis Hopper ended up directing, and was kind of cast and ready to go with that, with a fantastic lineup of Sam Shepard, Uma Thurman, Ann Archer, and it's a long story, and not tonight, but someone totally screwed it up. Sam Shepard walked off the film, and it fell apart. So I was kind of a little bit adrift. I spent the next couple of months trying to rescue The Hotspot, and in that time, I think the script came to me. My agent got it to me, and they were looking for a director. It was Paramount, and I read it. My English agent tried to persuade me not to do it because she read it and said, "No, Mike, it's really horrible. It's a really horrid script, and you shouldn't do it." But I liked it. I really thought, wow, there's something there. And I also had a feeling of how I could do it. So it was a very long process. I had to go in there and really fight to get Paramount to agree to me in the first place. There were a lot of 2 or 3 other very recognized American directors who were also up for it, Then the next fight was they wanted Kurt Russell to be in the film, and I said I didn't think that he was right. And I suggested Richard Gere, and this was like, the man who suggested having a gin and tonic at the bath, whatever, those cartoons. And Richard was completely not not anyone's favorite.
He was sort of way down the
He'd done King David. That was his last outing, and they basically said, "Okay, we're done with Richard." You know.
I mean, amazing to think that, because the American Gigolo, Richard Gere, was a huge star only 10 years previous.
Sure.
But Hollywood's a tough place.
Well, I think they gave him 4 or 5 shots, and each one kind of seemed to plumb a lower depth economically as far as they were concerned. Richard had become very Dalai Lama-ish at that point, and I remember he told me that the low spot of his life just before doing the film was doing a TV show in Germany where he realized he was on to talk about the Dalai Lama, and he realized he'd been brought on as entertainment between a juggler and a kind of ventriloquist or something. You know, they were there just to laugh at him. You know, so fighting for Richard really was dodgy, because I already was hardly secure in my own thing, and they forced me to meet Kurt Russell, who the one thing he said to me was, "Listen, I don't know if you want me for this film or not, but let me just give you one piece of advice: don't cast Richard Gere."
And people might have thought, if you said I'm doing Richard Gere, that you would be casting him as the cop hero rather than the villain. I think there was a bit of a surprise. The reason it worked was that, God, Richard Gere's really good when he's nasty.
Well, most actors are better when they're nasty. You know, I'd love to put Tom Cruise
on screen.
Yeah, whatever, you know. But I mean, give a handsome, charming, lovely smile, crinkly-eyed actor the chance to be a complete bastard, and that's good for an actor. So I always thought Richard would be good, and I'd seen elements of this in other films. I always thought he was a good actor, actually. Yeah.
I always think he's good in the Cotton Club, but the film seemed to kind of overtake everything else about it.
Also, he was not his own, best PR person, Richard. He pissed people off a lot, because he was always uncomfortable being a Hollywood kind of celebrity type person. So whenever he found himself in a good position, he would do something very perverse to either get into a fight or annoy someone or really insult someone, which is another thing that really drew me to him.
So did you knowing that, did you use that as a director to feed the performance, to wind him up in some way, to kind of make sure that all that was on screen? Because in Peck, those elements are definitely there in the eyes and the smile and the way he moves. How do you work with someone like that as a director?
Well, I think it's a double whammy, because actually the film was originally an Andy Garcia vehicle. Andy was a rising star, and this film was basically commissioned as an Andy Garcia project. Funnily enough, I had met Andy Garcia when he was doing stand-up at the Oval in South London.
I don't think anyone here knew that he did that.
Yeah. He and another guy did a double stand-up act,
Was he funny?
I met him because I used to work at the Oval. I don't remember him. I doubt it. I mean, you just saw the film. He's not Chuckles, exactly, But anyway, God bless him. He recommended me, which is actually, gave me a certain amount of a leg up. And then finding Richard, he was not sure about Richard, but he went with my judgment. They then did not get on at all. Richard, full of left-wing sympathies. Andy coming from a fairly right, had just become an American citizen and meant it. Had been in Cuba. Basically, Daddy owned a sugar plantation, rode around on a white Palomino with the boots and the riding crop. I mean, and then they got booted out. So he was not a huge fan of Castro for a start off. So he and Richard really didn't get on at all, which was rather good. So at the very end of the film, when he busts through the glass with the gun and rescues the missus, that was a reshoot. What actually happened was they weren't getting on to such an extent, and the sort of method acting thing had taken over to such an extent that when he did that through there, we then did the shot originally through the broken glass, and there wasn't any room, for anything else. So it was kind of clean point of view, and so Richard's looking up. And Andy kept goading him. I didn't even need him for the off lines. I just needed Richard, perfectly capable of doing his own lines, but he was calling him, "You fucking son of a bitch, you slimy little shithead," you know. And Richard was like, I thought, this is way off the script, and Richard was going, "Oh, fuck yourself, Andy." I mean, they were sort of got to this, like, what? It's not Andy, it's, you know, it's Raymond, you know. and then, and then he was waving his gun or something, and it was like, and then Richard leaned forward to grab his hand, and then Andy pulled it back right across the broken glass and basically attempted suicide. Just cut right across his wrist, and we had to close down for 2 weeks, and Richard had to go to emergency. We couldn't shoot because there was such a big plaster on his wrist and the whole thing. So, and afterwards I said to him, "Andy, what the fuck, you've just closed down." He went, "Oh, these things happen." And I was furious. And one time I was really angry, and I said, "No, they don't happen. It's totally unprofessional. You didn't need to do that, it's too much. It's too personal." The smashing of the furniture in the office, unscripted, So much of the set was broken by Andy, So he really went for the characters. So in terms of how do you work with an actor, you kind of just turn them loose on each other and sort of like, film it.
Yeah. You had a lot of, there are strong female actors in it. Nancy Travis, Laurie Metcalf, whose career was revived just very recently, extraordinarily. She was, at the time, she was known? She was already in Roseanne?
She may have. I wasn't aware of Roseanne. I was made aware of her, I think, through some Steppenwolf actors, and she was recommended. So I didn't really know her, and then I met her, and I immediately said, "Oh yes, please, she's the one." I think she is beyond genius, I have to say, and the scenes with her are actually, I think, probably tonight one of my favorite scenes. The scene where she gets shot at the end, and when her leg is up, it's like she's just an amazing actor. And when she does the thing in the ambulance, that's such a powerful scene, so she's very, very, very strong. And Nancy Travis, terrific actress. We've seen recently in what's it called, the Kosminski method or whatever, that thing with Michael Douglas, which
on Netflix.
Really, really good.
But she was she sort of got taken into comedy, didn't she? Because she did Three Men and a Little
Thing.
Baby.
Yeah.
Lady and Lady, I think, maybe both. Yeah. So that took her away from this. I suppose she's the femme fatale character in a way. Well, they all are. Yeah. Annabelle Sciorra as well.
Annabelle Sciorra, who of course is one of now the main characters in the Harvey Weinstein up-and-coming trial. I'd seen her in one low-budget sort of Italian-American gangster film, and cast her based on that, and she was terrific too.
And I think it's very important to have those, even though you say that it's a film that has misogynistic elements in it and violence, some lines that perhaps you would change now, in hindsight, they are still, as performers, extraordinarily vital to the whole.
Well, his character was based on his relationship with women and the wives and all the children. And I love at the end when he says, you haven't got any kids, Raymond, you don't understand. It's like such a blow up at the scene. Like people say, there are two kinds of people, those with children and those without, and they go, well, there's Dennis Peck, and, it's perhaps going a bit far. But he kind of just, he embodied that, and the script was great. So so much to play with, really a feast. I didn't realize how lucky I was until about 4 or 5 years later, when, having then gone through really the shredder in Hollywood and had every bad experience. After Internal Affairs, I kind of think, what's everyone complaining about? It's like a piece of cake, It's really nice here, and everyone's so nice to you, when the film's going well.
So it was a decent sized hit for with those stars, but essentially an indie movie.
Sure.
The decent sized hit. You then worked with Richard Gere again,
Mr.
Jones.
Not so good. Yeah.
That didn't work so well.
I
I always thought it was all right, but I didn't know in retrospect that financially it didn't work.
Well, that was the opposite in the sense. I had a very good producer on this, Frank Mancuso Jr., who was luckily the son of Frank Mancuso Sr., who happened to be the head of Paramount, so that helped, But Frank was very good. He was a young, kind of a slightly punky, was obsessed with Joe Strummer, wanted to be, like he was LA boy, but he wanted to be, cool. And so he was open. I mean, it took a bit of persuading at first, but then he was open. On the first day that we shot was the scene outside the city hall where he has the fight. And he says, I'm going to teach your wife to come and everything, and Andy beats him up. And he goes, not bad, and he does that whole scene. So that was the first day of the first shoot, right? So that was so hot that day, and I thought I was going to die. It was sort of summertime in Los Angeles. No one told me it was the hottest day in Los Angeles for 120 years. I just thought everyone seemed like, oh, they're all quite used to this. I'm going to die because I'm English, And we shot the scene. John Alonzo, when we were in pre-production, I had dinner with him, got very close with him. And he was telling me that he used to shoot a lot of stuff for National Geographic, and that he'd invented a lens, a 500mm lens, and he'd invented a trigger on it so that if you're shooting wildlife, he said, you don't want to be doing this. So he had a trigger focus for following animals. And I went, wow, have you still got the lens? And he said, yeah. So I said, oh, can we use it? Can we use it on the film? So he said, sure. So that first day, naively, not knowing about coverage and all of that stuff, I said, okay, let's just shoot the scene on have you got another lens like that, like another really long lens? So we had two massively long lenses at right angles to each other, and that was the kind of coverage. So everything's out of focus except for the subject, right? And apparently the producer and some of the other producers were watching me shooting this, clearly thinking, and probably looking at me turning purple because of the heat, just feeling so completely out of place in a kind of tropical Los Angeles. And apparently they had a conversation about firing me that night. And then they saw the dailies the next morning, and they went, oh, actually, it looks quite good. We'll give him another couple of days. But apparently I was on the verge of being fired after that scene.
It gives it that sense of animals rutting.
Absolutely,
kind of
yeah.
People
And
fighting
then,
in the jungle.
as you can tell, the lens is used all the way through. The stuff on the streets with the cars and the prostitutes and everything, that's all shot on that lens. Either that, or then I said, oh, go handheld, So John liked all that because it meant we could move quickly.
Because then leaving Las Vegas was, 5 years later?
I'm not sure,
95, 96, and then which got the Oscars. We got Oscar nominations and one Oscar for Nick Cage, and got you Oscar nominations. But puts you back on top, the top of the world, Mark, to use a great gangster thing. But how's that feeling? So you've been up, and then you went down again with Mr. Jones, and then brought back a success. Could you work out what it was that they wanted, what it was that worked, what the magic formulas were?
Oh yeah, I mean they want success, and it's as simple as that. And that's not difficult to understand. As what's his name? A very famous producer said to me, it's called the film business, Mike. It's called show business, and there's a reason for that. It's not art, it's biz. So success is really the only thing. The difficult thing to negotiate, but interesting because both Internal Affairs and, let's say, Leaving Las Vegas, I had a freedom that I didn't have on any of the other films. So I had Frank Mancuso Jr., who basically, once he decided not to fire me, let me get on with it because he liked Joe Strummer and he thought, well, maybe these Brits, just let them go. And he gave me terrific freedom, and a good script. So then, in the meantime, Mr. Jones and the Browning version and Liebestraum and all these things were really disastrous, in terms of just dealing with, so much stuff that you couldn't follow, you couldn't be instinctive until we get to, let's say, Leaving Las Vegas, which was so under the radar and so low budget, Super 16 and all of that, once I got the money from a slightly crazy producer, but again, not a Hollywood person, she was Argentinian and French, you then get to shoot the film in the way that you want to shoot it, and it could be a success, Really the shame is that, for me, is that the studio types can't understand that, it's better to sometimes, if someone has proved that they can make a film, which I believe I have, that might be better just to let them get on with it, and because maybe I know better than they do in terms of the making of the film. But no, they always ought to come in and go, no, we've had a meeting and we really think this scene should move. And you go, really? You know, I'm not telling you how to produce the film. Why don't you just let me make the film? So, you know, you try not to be cynical, or let's say call it realistic. You know, that's all. And I've found that it doesn't really work there for me, because it's so hard for me to get that situation again.
And working with Richard Gere and Andy Garcia on this, and we've just heard the managing that you had to do, or just let them get at it. Working with Nicolas Cage on Leaving Las Vegas. I mean, he does a lot of acting if you let him. You know, he's kind of a big performer, and he does a lot of drinking and performing in Leaving Las Vegas. Did the experiences, you know, as a filmmaker, did you come to that the wiser from having done Internal Affairs?
I mean, because it was different, because it was my gig in a way, you know, and I had a good producer looking after my back and a really good team. And, you know, because I made the schedule so quick, because the other thing I realized is the more time you have making a film, it's the more time to get it wrong and the more time to get into trouble with a lot of other people, more time for them to think about it. So the best thing is to shoot it really quickly. So and Super 16 was perfect for that, 2 cameras. So Nick really wanted to do it. You know, I knew he was a good actor, and I felt he was right for the part. Really, the challenge with Nick was containing him, because he had arrived at a place where I think he always wanted to be the star of the film, as in a quirky performance to be the jewel in the crown of the film, and this was an ensemble film, him and Elizabeth. So holding him back sometimes really pissed him off. You know, you'd get very angry if I dared to, you know, critique his overacting, let's put it.
Just a little bit less, could do a bit quiet.
Yeah, less definitely could be more Nicolas, you know. You know, first of all, he wanted to do the entire film completely drunk all the way through and use an earpiece because he'd heard that Marlon Brando worked like that now. And I said, but you know, you're acting with another person and you're going to be drunk and we don't have a lot of money, you know. So no, the answer is no. So he went ahead and did it anyway in one scene to make his point. Smashed up a table, injured a stunt woman, and then luckily everyone clapped, so we got away with it. But again, it's a bit like Andy and slitting the wrist. I was just like, shut the fuck up and just act, you know. I mean, why do you have to do that, you know? I mean, I guess it's the price you pay for a certain kind of talent. Yeah. But
got to look after the furniture on your sets, Mike Figgis.
Absolutely, yeah. I like the furniture.
It's good stuff here. Yeah. It also seemed to me that, looking at Internal Affairs again tonight, that there is experimental camera work going on, and you did that again in Leaving Las Vegas, going on to Super 16, and then you if you jump forward to Time Code, where you split the screen and had 4 different stories going on, and everyone remember that film, and it was one of the first digital experiments, and you managed to still get, you know, big stars, Salma Hayek up there, and I can't remember everyone else.
Stellan
Skarsgård, brilliant in there. When did you think, right, I'm an experimenter. That's what I want to do with my cinema. Having, you know, got to the Oscars and been Oscar nominated, to go, right, I'm going to do this with my technology.
I wish I could give that as a sort of like, I made a decision on the 15th of February. Because, you know, the truth is nothing works like that. What happens is circumstances occur, and you find yourself in a certain position. So, for example, I wanted to get out of Hollywood, and so I thought I'll do Leaving Las Vegas, you know, because they'll hate it. He dies in the end, and it's miserable. So it's like, that's my passport out of here, Super 16. And it's like, blow me, it's a hit, you know. It's like Oscars and things. It's like, what? You know, so then suddenly you find yourself back on the high table, you know, and everybody, you know, New Line offer you a lot of money to make a film and so on. Disney then offer you a lot of money to make a film. But meanwhile, because I'd sort of in a way made that decision 2 or 3 years earlier at the time of Leaving Las Vegas, which was the most miserable time of my life in terms of, you know, creativity, I had already sort of like started fiddling around with digital cameras and thought, oh, this is good, this is cheap, this doesn't need all those awful, interfering people. So, and the idea for Timecode was as a performance art piece in London, and then just by a quirk of whatever, I was under contract to Sony, who'd offered me a lot of money to have what they call a housekeeping deal, and I was duty bound to tell them any project I was going to do. So I'd become friends with John Calley, who was head of the studio, because he was a jazz bass player. That's why we were friends. And he'd known Charlie Parker. So we used to have these nice lunches and talk about jazz. And he said, what are you up to? And I said, I'm going to do this wacky piece in London with 4 cameras, a real-time feature film. And he went, well, why don't you do it here? This is Sony Studios. We make that stuff, He was smart, because he said, we're about to go into the digital age. This would be a great newspaper story, basically, which it was. It was a front-page New York Times story. And he said, I'd budgeted £5,000 to do it here. And he said, could you do it for $5 million? And I went, well, I don't know. Maybe, having said that, that $5 million went on. I don't know where it went. It just that's like coffee money there. That just went on to people who hang around and sort of don't drive trucks for you or whatever. So yeah. So that's how that happened. I'd love to say that it was a part of a plan. It sort of was, but the circumstances were and good. The fact is, I'm happy that it was made in that way and did have those actors.
It may not be part of a plan, but it's something that there's always interesting. The technology, the cameras have always. You went on to invent the camera, so it's not by chance that you kind of keep experimenting with the visual medium.
Well, I realized very quickly, having done years of like music and then sort of performance art, and then making a film, and then very quickly then going to America, and then realizing that they pay these like ridiculous amounts of money for you to make a film, which already is a pleasurable experience, and then you get to kind of try things, and they pay you, so I kind of, this is really, this is a good job, I thought, And so within that, never really having had a proper job in my life, the idea of, you realize very, very quickly, you could go the Ridley Scott route and just make a shitload of money and produce a lot of stuff, and then have a huge house and a Rolls Royce and read the Financial Times and smoke cigars and all of that stuff, and then make these humongous kind of studio films, over and over and over again. So the idea of making something that big to me is it's like a nightmare. That many people on a set, that many actors, that many sets. It's like some people really kind of get excited about that. To me, it's like it's a nightmare idea. I like 2 men in a prison cell. That sounds like a good one. And so I realized that you could also do the kind of other route, not make quite so much money, but enough money, they still pay you, Filmmaking at that point was still a very kind of well-paid job. Now, not so much, but then. So the idea of experimenting, i.e. trying something new and not being bored by making the same film over and over again, seemed like a no-brainer, actually, to me. I'd look at other people and kind of go, why are they doing this? They're already so rich. Why do they want to make that same film again, But the answer is you get addicted to, I don't think it's the money. It's the thing that comes out in the Hollywood Reporter every year, whatever, saying, the 100 most powerful people in Hollywood. And there's 2 columns, and they're really scary. One is your position on the chain, and the other one is your position last year. And if you're seen as dropping, it's like, oh my God, he was 3 last year, and now he's 10,
Never going back up.
Yeah.
Mike, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I must open up the floor to questions from you guys. It's a Q&A. One or two questions. There's certainly one. There's 2. So we'll go to the gentleman with his hand up in the middle, first of all. We'll go to this gentleman first, but so don't worry, we won't forget you.
Oddly enough, I've been wondering for 30 years, was the Peck's remark about children at the end, was that planned from the beginning? Or did he just come up with it there and then?
I think Richard really pushed the yuppie children thing. I think he really got into his role and in that respect. And what happened was this is a second ending. The first ending took place underwater in the swimming pool that you vaguely, and the only reason that swimming pool shot is in the film was to justify the fact that it was going to end up in a swimming pool. They crashed through the window, they fought underwater, and he shot him underwater, right? And prior to them crashing through the window, I think Richard had improvised the line about you fucking yuppie, blah, 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 you know. And so the yuppie thing had stuck, and then the thing with the kids. So yeah.
I always wondered if it was inspired by Napoleon's remark.
Pardon?
I wondered if it was inspired by Napoleon, who said a married man with children will do anything for money.
No, I don't think so, no.
Oh. That's a disappointment.
But the good bit about the ending in the swimming pool, I never knew that. I did wonder when it came. I was like,
I mean, if you watch the trailer, there's a whole section underwater, and people would come out of the film going, what happened to the underwater sequence, you know?
There's a gentleman over there who had his hand up.
Thank you so much to Ciné Lumière for giving us a chance to see this on the big screen, because I have never seen it on the big screen before, so that's brilliant. Thank you to both to discussing this at great length, which we really loved. My question is more about, a lot of what you discussed was watching this movie with a 30-year-on perspective. And there are so many directors now that would recut, reshoot, do anything to change what they'd produced 30 years ago. Is there anything that you would change?
My own performance, perhaps. No, I mean, films are what they are. You know, it's... I was wondering whether, the kind of just the overall style of it, because, for example, if you watch something like Scarface or something like that, you know, you've got the Georgie Moroder type kind of score, and there's a lot of synth stuff in this as well. But I liked it. The score was pretty much improvised. So a quick story about the score. I wanted to do the score, and Paramount were very, very resistant. And Frank Mancuso was also very resistant. And then I went with him to a party. I think he had a birthday party, and what's the guy, the director who wrote Bonnie and Clyde?
Arthur Penn, who directed it.
The writer. No, not then. Who is it? Anyway, I'll think of his name in a minute. There was another director there who, in front of Frank, suddenly went, oh, really nice to meet you. I loved Stormy Monday. And I went, oh, that's very kind of you. And he said, oh, I loved the score. And I went, oh, thank you. And he said, so how did you work on the score? I said, well, I just brought keyboards and things into the editing room. And he said, what, with your composer? And I went, no, I composed the score. He went, you did the score? Wow, because I've used it. He did Tequila Sunrise. Who's the director? Robert Towne.
He wrote Chinatown as well.
Yeah, Chinatown.
Yeah.
So Robert Towne, this was Robert Towne. He went, I've used your Stormy Monday score as temp score all the way through the editing of Tequila Sunrise, and it's really hard to replace it, So you get, and I went, oh, that's so kind. And I looked at Frank, and I could see Frank was like, okay. So they then made a compromise, and they said, okay, if you work with some other composers, we'll let you do the score. So that's how he ended up, with Anthony Marinelli and his partner. And so what was great for me was that it was exciting to work on a film in Los Angeles. It was twice as exciting to work on music in Los Angeles, because you suddenly realize there is this vast pool of like the best jazz musicians in the world, and they'll all come in and do sessions for you. And so these people were turning up, amazing singers and incredible, Puerto Rican guitarist, and a guy who he was a woodwind player, but he turned up with a truck full of plastic pipes. So he'd literally assemble these plumbing pipes from here to maybe halfway down that auditorium, and then he'd blow into them, and you'd get this kind of like incredibly low didgeridoo sort of sound. And and then we'd sample that on an early kind of sampling thing. And so the process of actually, I actually did compose most of the music, but these guys were incredible producers and facilitators. So that was. There's one last anecdote. So when we did the test screening with the first ending of them going through the glass and underwater, I was using Temp score, so I hadn't combined with the other composers yet. I recorded everything on a Porter Studio, which is a 4-track cassette player. I had one sampler and a keyboard and a drum machine. That's it. And so I then would transfer from the cassette 4-track onto a high-end cassette player, transfer that onto 35mm sound, and then that became the Temp score. So when we did the first testing in Paramount, which is, you invite hundreds of people in, we did the screening. So you sit there and you have a dial in front of you, and the guy from the theater says, okay, that's the volume control. Never take it beyond that point there, right? And I'd put, as you hear in the film, all this low-end thumping, like boom, boom. It's like very threatening low piano hits and thumps and lots of drones and so it was playing very nicely. And it was my first test screening, and it was unbelievable because the audience suddenly kind of like really connected with it. They were shouting at the screen. There was a pregnant woman who suddenly had her water burst and she had to go outside. She was waiting for the ambulance and she said, I'm just going to go back in again until tell me when the ambulance arrives. And she sat at the back. So that was like the great endorsement, right? So the bit at the end when Richard's kind of about to get Nancy Travers, boom, they all started screaming. People started screaming, don't go in there, don't go in there. The volume went right up and I knew there was a huge thump coming, which was, Richard Gere's like moment, right? So I was not looking, so I was judging it by ear because they were making so much noise. So when Richard Gere came out, this sound went like this, and it was like, it's the sound of all the bass units being blown out of the speakers. And so from then on until the end of the film, there were no bass units, it was just the surrounds, so the sound was actually very tinny. And afterwards, they sort of said, something wrong with the sound system. I said, yes, I noticed that, Actually, I destroyed the sound system, And then at the end, when he did finally kill him, they did the scorecards. And I went outside, and all the executives came outside. They offered me a cigar. No one had spoken to me, really, until that point. Suddenly, they thought, oh, it's a hit. And then the test cards started coming in, and they were all, people had, someone had written, Richard Gere needs to die much more slowly. He needs to be fully conscious while Andy beats him to death with a baseball bat or something like that. Wow, they really don't like him. And so based on that, they made me do a reshoot of the actual ending, not in the swimming pool.
Well, Internal Affairs, a film that can blow your bass bins and make you give birth, which is extraordinary. Do we have time for one more question for this gentleman? Yes, we do.
Sorry, I'm not quite sure that you've answered his question about what you might change after 30
Oh, I'd
years.
forgotten that was the question.
Well, you did straight away. Obviously, music was.
He said he wouldn't change the score in a way. Yes, he said he wouldn't change it.
No, I mean, I watched it. I won't watch it again, probably. I liked it, yeah.
We all loved it.
And I always think of, like, most films as being, okay, they're never perfect, never. And so if you can get to the end, for me personally, and I think my biggest critic, and then still be watching and kind of engaged, then I was happy with it. Of course, if I made it now, without a doubt, one would shoot it in a different way. And I know obviously a lot more about camera and things now, but thank God I didn't, Thank God I just went, John Alonzo, you're great, this is what I want, please.
I think 30 years is a long time, and I think it's held up amazingly. I mean, it really is still a real tight affair. And
thank you. Thank you.
I do have one more question, and because it's the only woman that's asking a question, I do think we should go to her because it's a hugely misogynist film, so it might be interesting.
Thank you. I think we've all really enjoyed listening to you, and I could sit here for hours just hearing more about the film. And you've mentioned a lot about Hollywood. I was wondering if you had any comment on the British film industry, where it's at right now.
Wow.
It's because
I think the film industry everywhere is in a very, some people have more money, therefore their problems are richer, and that some have poorer financial problems and so on. One of the issues is there are so many films being made, and there's so much. It's apparently venues, but the irony being that they're even more restricted than they were before, I think. And in Britain, in particular, we have our favorite, organizations, if you like. I worry about the British film industry. Actually, I do. I think it's so easy to get bogged down in, let's say. Let me put it a different way. I think the essence of a good film is storytelling, full stop. And I think, in general, because film has kind of really just regurgitated itself over and over again, we seem to have lost the plot, the ability to tell good stories. Ultimately, a good story is a very simple thing. It's about relationships between people and how they resolve them or they don't resolve them. The story has to work for an audience because the audience has to think, I get it. I see a bit of myself in there. So, and the problem is that films have become so technical and writers have become so important, as in we must be aware of the writer and the psychology of it all, that I feel that in many ways we have lost the ability to tell good stories. And I would like to see a return to a simpler, powerful, scaled-down version of good storytelling. And also the idea that the audience, you've got to let them get out of the cinema with something. I mean, this is not a great example, but as a miserable ending, but just some kind of catharsis or something, yeah. Because I think that's the point of storytelling, and ultimately that's the point of cinema, is to enrich the audience, give them reason to carry on, even showing them the dark stuff. But there is still always some light there somewhere. Yeah. So, interestingly, I'm working in Korea now, and I'm going to, I think, make 3 short films there. And I've become very, very interested in the short film as a kind of genre, because it forces you to just focus on character. And, you've got to get to the point quite quickly. And it gets you out of the absolutely dreadful 3-act structure, which is one of the things that has brought cinema to its, not just its knees, its ankles. I would love nothing more than to get rid of the 3-act structure.
Mike, you said that about the woman whose waters broke during your test screening 30 years ago. Well, tonight, from Los Angeles,
here is the child.
The child, little Mike, or Dennis.
Yeah.
You might be called Dennis, which would be
Little
really
Peck.
weird.
Yeah.
Mike, absolutely fantastic to hear your stories about the rest of your career and the future of film. I hope we've encompassed everything. Thanks to Ciné Lumière and to the Academy for putting this craft of film. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoyed Internal Affairs from its director, Mike Figgis.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you. Thank you, Ciné Lumière.